And I'm going to hand it off to our wonderful moderator, Susan Gladwin, to take it. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here today with you and to kick off this Energy Summit. I was listening to Open Circuit. How many are fans? Catherine Hamilton, Jigger, Stephen, yes? On the way over here, and Jigger was saying in his famously direct style, like, this is the best climate presidency ever. He's throwing people into our arms because the policies are so, frankly, misguided and make VPPs and distributed energy really the best choice. So that's the silver lining. I recommend you check out how Jigger puts it, because he's always got the best framing for these things. But it was exciting to hear, and I really think VPPs are having a moment, and we're poised to scale for this. So I want to thank Advanced Energy United. Chloe's coming from there as our sponsor. And I wanted to also thank, maybe a round of applause for Lila Warren, who just spoke. She's been a tremendous help. Thank you, Lila. And I just want to quickly, I'm coming to you as a former DOE, part of the loan programs office, part of that diaspora that's taking place as we speak. I was there 2.5 years working on virtual power plants in the, bringing that in to get funding. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I just want to pause and thank my colleagues at Department of Energy who are still there. Thank them for their service, because we need people to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively. So I just recognize them. Thank you, folks. And also, well, yeah, we'll leave it at that. So by way of introduction myself, as I mentioned, I was at the Loan Programs Office right when the Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2022 summer. I was in touch with Jigger. He said, come on in. They were going from 40 people to 400 people, from 40 billion to 400 billion, the world's largest green bank, and they really needed people to help come and make that happen. And so I was privileged to work on originating the virtual power plant project pipeline along with a couple other colleagues, some of whom I have probably worked with, some of you here. I still kind of want to honor the confidentiality, but you can say if you worked with us and how great that was. We did get a couple VPP projects out the door before the end of January. So the ones I got to work on were Sun Wealth, a company out of Massachusetts, receiving over $300 million to do small-scale CNI VPP, and Nostromo, which is about thermal storage. They've got a demo at Beverly Hills Hotel, and that's also part of a VPP. So success was had. There was plenty more that could happen should that ever become more feasible with this administration. And so, how many are actively working on virtual power plants in some form or fashion? I think quite a few. Yeah, great. We're gonna, well, so just to sort of set up for this question about VPPs to kick us off, I wanted to quote Ryan Heldig, might not be saying his name right, but recently a Brattle Group report came out that we'll probably be referencing. And he was saying, like, unlike some of the other energy choices out there, things like demand response, demand flexibility, grid flexibility, virtual power plants in total do not get stuck in transmission interconnection queues, are not currently limited by supply chain uncertainties, we'll talk about that, and are more insulated from tariff uncertainty than other resources. So VPPs are really here to help scale this load, to meet the demands of this load growth and other concerns. So I just sort of tee us up with VPPs are having a moment. VPPs are the rock star of the energy world, in my opinion. So let's talk first about what is a VPP a little bit. So as you introduce yourselves, I would love you to also throw in a sort of lightning round, one or two sentence. If you're at a dinner party with folks who are totally not in this space, what is a VPP? Can you help us understand that? Thank you. I'll start with you, Curtis.
Perfect. So Curtis Tung, Chief Strategist with Renew Home. A little bit of background on Renew. We operate one of the largest VPPs in the nation, about 3 gigawatts of dispatchable flexibility. I think that the distinction I would make, and I think the question too is a little bit of a Rorschach test. It's going to tell you more probably about me than kind of anything else. But I would kind of make the distinction between demand response and kind of VPPs really as I kind of consider DR, that is a big red button. Right, it is typically called in an emergency, not super frequently. I think a lot of the users that are participating, it's going to be noticeable. Whereas at VPP, kind of my personal kind of mental model is more of a kind of dashboard of dials, like something that's always on. It's kind of software infrastructure. It's kind of constantly optimizing the background against customer preferences, real-time energy, local grid constraints, kind of things along those lines. And it really kind of importantly, this is not a kind of either-or situation. This is a guess and. Like, when you need the big red button, it's really helpful to have that big red button there. I think a lot of the opportunity that we're leaving on the table is that kind of constant, always on, kind of persistent kind of optimization in the background. My personal 2 cents.
Hi, my name is Yang Yu. I'm the Director of Business Development from Sunrun VPP team. For some of you who doesn't know Sunrun, we are actually the largest residential solar and battery provider in the country. We have over 1 million customers nationwide, and we have over 150,000 batteries deployed so far. Sitting on this massive fleet, obviously we are one of the largest residential battery VPP aggregator in this industry. So when I think about VPP, obviously people are more familiar with demand response. When I think about demand response, I feel like it's more focused on demand reduction. And when you think about VPP, it emphasizes on behind-meter generation. So basically, how are you using software to aggregate a fleet of DERs, including behind-meter generation, EV, or thermostat, or other devices to deliver grid services similar, if not identical, to utility-scale generation?
Hi everyone, my name is Colin Smith. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager for LEAP, which is a demand response aggregator, or as we like to say, aggregator of aggregators for DERs across the country. Basically, as Jigar Shah is very aware, there's tons of these DERs, connected devices being deployed throughout the US. We saw that there needed to be an easy, convenient way for customers to be able to connect their devices to programs that can get them paid for providing the services that Yang and Curtis talked about. So LEAP's software is designed to make it easy for the companies that supply those technologies, that have that relationship with the end customer, to connect those customers to those types of programs. We're a fully sort of like back-end white label software system. We sort of handle all the market-facing side of the VPP experience and allow our partners, who are the companies that supply these technologies, to focus on what they do best, which is getting these products into customers' hands. So you might not see our name on any technology or device out there, but we're working very hard on the back end to make sure all these devices are connected to the markets and the programs that allow them to supply services to the grid. And on that note, getting into the icebreaker question, I do tend to use demand response and VPP interchangeably, and if you all feel like doing the same, I would not fault you. But I think technically, if you look at the terminology, you could consider demand response to be more of an umbrella term. Any sort of system that pushes customer demand to respond to the needs of the grid could be considered demand response. Time of use rates could be considered demand response. Dynamic pricing tariffs, things of that nature. Whereas VPPs, or virtual power plants, I think brings to mind like a level of dispatchability. Similar to a power plant, you're calling on this resource to be available when it's needed. And that's exactly what VPPs do. They are aggregations of smaller devices that can be called upon to supply whatever services a power plant would provide, whether that's energy, whether that's capacity, whether that's ancillary services, making sure that this aggregation is, in all respects and purposes, a power plant, just as we like to say, virtual.
Thanks for having us, Swiss Next, and thanks for leading this, Susan. I am Chloe Holden. I'm at Advanced Energy United. We are an organization that does education for policymakers, legislators, regulators. We're in state houses all over the country, educating folks and working on advancing policies that are good for DER companies, good for renewable energy, good for grid flexibility, and other technologies in the clean tech umbrella. So I think virtual power plants, I align with everyone's definition. I think all definitions kind of have their place depending on what you're using it for. I think when I like to explain virtual power plants to people, I explain it as an aggregation of devices. A lot of these devices are new on the market, so things like behind-the-meter battery storage, electric vehicle charging, smart thermostats that are connected to air conditioning. And that's not the end of the list. I've been really excited to see new startups kind of popping up all the time that could enroll their devices in VPPs. So definitely a huge and growing resource as folks choose to add these devices behind the meter in their homes and businesses. And then what makes something a VPP is aggregating all these devices, controlling them intelligently with software to provide, like Colin said, energy capacity, ancillary services, and then essentially potentially can work as an alternative to a peaker plant. Increasingly, from the system operator's perspective, VPPs and traditional generation can be virtually identical, and the software has evolved really rapidly to get it to that point, or nearly to that point. And VPPs can also go beyond traditional generation in one important respect, which is by providing relief in the distribution and transmission system, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I think that's a really valuable thing. We're here in California, bills are sky high, and those transmission and distribution investments are a major contributor to those bills. So VPPs can do something that regular generation can't, which is whereas a power plant just floods the system at every level with power, which is much needed, virtual power plants can provide relief and extend the lifetime of infrastructure that costs a lot to deploy.
Feel free to jump in if you've got stuff to add. So we're seeing a federal government that's shifting priorities away from things like distributed generation, this kind of world of local devices that are aggregated. But the good news is, because it's local, we can do a lot at the local level, and that means also at the state level. So I want to talk about current state of VPPs in California, and so in spite of federal setbacks, how we can keep the momentum going. Who's participating in California VPPs? What types of technologies? We've already touched on some of the devices. Are there others that might be coming online, that unlikely suspects, for example? And then what's the market reach? Like, how big is California in terms of a VPP, and how far have we gotten? I don't think we've gotten very far yet. There's so much potential. So I wonder, Chloe, if I can call on you to speak to maybe some of the research AEU has done on that last part first. How big is the market? How far do we have to really realize the full potential?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm definitely excited to hear about kind of these folks' participation in the California market. I feel like concrete examples are my favorite to hear about. United has been relying a lot on the study that you referenced earlier by the Brattle Group. So this is a study that came out about a year ago that sized the virtual power plant market in California. And VPPs include traditional demand response, which the study also kind of took into consideration, building automation systems often in commercial facilities, and also looked at the forecast of deployment for devices like batteries, EV charging, smart thermostats. And I really like that study took a really practical approach to sizing the market for California VPPs. So, you can look at a smart thermostat, and that smart thermostat realistically may not be able to, contribute X capacity, its full capacity, what you call nameplate capacity. You have to look at what the real world data says about how much actual capacity, one smart thermostat can offer. Then you have to further discount based on, will that smart thermostat actually be available? How likely is it to participate in a demand response or virtual power plant event? And so this study made those kind of real world data-based evaluations for virtual power plant potential from all these behind-the-meter devices in California that are forecast to come onto the grid. And they found a customer savings of $550 million annually. A big chunk of that savings is payments that would be made to DER hosts, so homeowners, business owners with DERs. And then there's additional savings that would accrue to folks who don't have DERs, but it's savings that accrue through lower generation costs and transmission and distribution system savings. So what we essentially found in that study is there's massive virtual power plant potential in California if DRs are, compensated adequately and accurately for the role that they're providing on the grid. And it also found that all ratepayers get savings if VPPs are implemented to their maximum abilities.
I guess one of the key message I want to deliver over here is probably some of you, when you see VPP in the media, everyone is talking about VPP is still in the pilot phase. I want to say it's not. Company like Sunrun or other industry partners, we are already operating VPP at massive scale in many markets. And also just want to put things into perspective. For California, if you look at what we, Sunrun, operating, like how many VPP opportunity do we have in this market? Basically, we have 3 programs right now. The first one is a statewide VPP program we call CalReady. That is our customer-facing program name, which is actually the CEC Demand-Side Grid Support Program. Last year, 2024, we have 16,000 customers participate, and our peak capacity is around 58 megawatts. And right now, we're actually enrolling customers for this season. We haven't made any public announcement yet, but we're expecting the volume going to be 3 times or even more bigger compared to last year. And on top of the statewide program, we are also very excited to launch our second partnership with PG&E this summer. So instead of focus on bulk system peak load reduction, we are looking at distribution relief VPP, basically looking at batteries physically sitting behind constrained feeders or substation to deliver local level peak load reduction. And I think the ultimate goal of this approach is for utility to have a tool from a DER space. Can we use this DER to deferral or even avoid distribution infrastructure upgrade, create savings for our ratepayers? And beyond these 2 programs, we also have, we call it demand-side load modifying program with CCAs, community choice aggregation. So as some of you may know, CCA have an obligation to procure capacity to meet their resource adequacy obligation. And DERs, for example, behind meter generation, storage can also provide same resource adequacy benefit, but instead of doing wholesale market integrated RE product, we are doing demand-side capacity program to the CCA. CCA can use those capacity to offset the RE obligation for the following year. So why aren't we doing CAISO integrated product? I think I'm going to save for a later topic when we talk about some of the challenge we have in California. But again, like we have multiple programs already in California, and the fleet is already in massive fleet. A lot of opportunities going on, but also a lot of challenge if you look into some of the details over here.
Go ahead.
Yes, I definitely echo what Yang said. If there's one thing that I'd want everyone to take away from this panel is that VPPs are here. They're not a science fiction. You know, they are happening and being deployed and providing service to the grid. The second thing I'd want everyone to take away is that there is still a lot that needs to be done for this resource to achieve the scale that it's able to. You know, we asked about, you know, what is and is not participating. One thing that's not participating at the level that it could be is distributed batteries. California has over 1 gigawatt of distributed batteries just in people's homes, just in residential homes right now. But the amount of those that are participating in VPP programs is paltry. And part of that, the reason for that is because currently, for a very long time at least, batteries could not be compensated for exports that they sent back to the grid, which is a substantial amount of the capacity that they can provide. A customer who has a traditional Tesla Powerwall in their home, at peak hours, you know, they could run their whole home off that battery and still have almost half the capacity left to provide back to the grid. When you run the numbers, which Leap did in a recent white paper we published a couple months ago, you know, even if every single battery in a customer's home in California participated in the wholesale markets with CAISO, there would still be roughly 600 megawatts of capacity that CAISO would just have no access to, because that's the portion that would only be bid into the market if batteries were compensated for exports back to the grid. Fortunately, there is some movement on this. New programs like DSGS, demand-side grid support, which I'm sure Yang will go into more detail later about as well, are kind of allowing compensation for these types of services and showing how much it improves the participation rates for these types of resources. But we're still seeing, that this particular asset class sort of hamstrung by limitations on how they can participate in the wholesale market.
I would agree with all of the above. I think the one thing that I would, so also a little bit of background just in terms of the kind of robustness of kind of VPP participation across the US. Yeah, it is here. So we operate kind of VPPs in CAISO and ERCOT and NISO with kind of market integrated, kind of ISO integrated programs, delivering capacity, kind of wholesale energy value, wholesale electricity value. The thing that I would add is, as robust as it seems, the majority of these devices that are already deployed, kind of like sitting in garages, kind of hanging on the walls of homes, they are simply sitting on the sidelines still. Like the vast majority of devices, and unfortunately, they are not responding to kind of changing grid conditions, kind of real-time pricing, or even kind of customer tariffs. And of that fraction that do, then only a fraction of that fraction are actually meaningfully integrated into either a market VPP, a utility VPP, or some of the programs that kind of fit in between, kind of like PG&E's ART program. So I think that the real opportunity that I think just us as an industry kind of needs to be rowing towards is, how do we really unlock that latent potential of the hundreds of thousands, the millions of devices kind of across the US and also kind of within California that are still just sitting on the sidelines, just like, put me in, coach. We need more devices in the market.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Some Californians here might remember receiving an Amber Alert asking them to reduce their energy usage during a particularly high demand period. I forget when that went out. I don't actually live here, but I heard about it from family. And, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow when you're paying high bills and then you're asked to voluntarily change your usage patterns. When we have the technology to pay people to do that and to benefit the whole grid and make the grid more affordable for everyone. So yeah, putting those devices to work is key.
Talk about the unlock in a minute, but first let's talk just a little bit more about why VPPs matter now and what are the market drivers. I mean, we're all sort of, there's the hype about data center load growth. Again, to quote Jigger, he's like, it's not 600,000, 60,000, what did he say? It's 25,000 megawatts that are needed by 2030. And so it's the order of magnitude that may be off, but nonetheless, the growth will be there. And of course, as we electrify, things change there too. So how much is load growth going to be an issue? And what else is driving the need for VPPs? Some of the mega forces we touched on earlier as well.
I guess from my perspective, kind of why now? It's all about affordability. I think we all know, rates, kind of bundled kilowatt costs, so they're going up. Kind of this has been going on for years. And I think maybe 20%, kind of a quarter of folks, they're energy insecure, meaning that they need to make a pretty regular decision. Am I going to pay this energy bill, or am I going to pay a credit card bill, which is awful for many different reasons. I think it's interesting, kind of when you do take a look at those kilowatt hour costs, like where that increase in cost is coming from. And if you look at generation, over the past 10 years, generation is down, right? Like we've done a really good job as an industry just like hammering down those costs. But unfortunately, some of the delivery costs, both bulk transmission and distribution, are up and to the right, and enough so that a lot of the kind of generation gains have been, muted or negated. And I think when we kind of look at VPPs as a resource, it's kind of there is this kind of peanut butter resource kind of across a map where we have this critical mass, this critical threshold of devices kind of within a substation, kind of at a feeder level, within a SLAP, kind of all kind of around a specific pricing node, kind of within California or any market for that matter. And it has this ability to be able to respond within minutes to buy a little additional hosting capacity on a kind of locally constrained circuit, to be able to kind of spool up if there's an unexpected generation outage, right? So we don't need to build that additional peaker. And like all these infrastructure costs, that ultimately is what's going to be driving some of these costs upward. I think that VPPs are a very cost-effective tool to be able to deflate some of those ballooning costs when properly deployed.
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that load growth is, as you said, Susan, a key driver in utilities' interest in all sorts of generation resources, but also virtual power plants as a key resource to manage this growth. Because if you think about it, with data centers coming online, a data center requires electricity almost at all hours of the day with some flexibility. What that means is that the baseload amount of electricity that is going to need to be supplied to the grid is going to be going up. So like if you think about a load curve, the amount of energy at the bottom of that curve is going to be expanding, the amount of energy needed. What that means is that utilities need to start procuring more energy to reduce the peak at the top of the load curve. That's one solution to kind of deal with this load growth, because utilities need to procure enough electricity to meet the very peak demand that they can see on the grid. If you start reducing that very highest peak that they're going to see, then even as the baseload demand goes up, they don't have to procure quite as many resources because they don't need to. They have to procure for a smaller peak. Reducing that peak is exactly the service that virtual power plants can provide. And that's why they're being looked at by so many utilities and markets as a key solution for this issue. And that's just for the data center load growth that everyone's hearing about. When you also add in things like electric vehicles, transition to electric heating systems, these are also loads that will certainly increase the power demand on the grid, but they're also more controllable loads. You have more flexibility over when an EV charges. You have some more flexibility about when a heat pump operates. And in those cases, VPPs composed of heat pumps and EVs can play a huge role, not just in reducing the peak, but actually reducing the kind of controlling and shaping the way that these new sources of load are actually adding load to the grid, so to reduce the procurement requirements by utilities.
Yeah, a few things to add over here is I think VPP provides fast and scalable capacity solutions to address load growth issue. Traditionally, like when there's a load growth, I think the easiest way is to build a new power plant. But usually that takes multiple years and sometimes even longer if there's an interconnection delay. And when we talk about VPP, most of the time, we are talking about deploying existing asset. So VPP can be stood up in a matter of months to tap into existing DER resource to create this new capacity to support new load. And just provide another example. So back in 2023, when we did our first partnership with PG&E, we enrolled 8,500 customers into the program within 6 months between contract signing and actual battery dispatch. And that's not happening if you talk about building another natural gas peaker plant. So this is really a fast, scalable solution to address this kind of problem. And in terms of some of the benefits, when you talk about affordability, when you participate in a VPP, company like Sunrun or Leap or Renew Home, we always provide a customer payment to award you to participate in the program, either your enrollment or your performance. And for participants, you can use those payments to offset your utility bill. At the same time, that also creates a cheaper grid for everyone else because, like Colin said, VPP address peak demand issue, and peak demand is always the most expensive generation, maybe 4 to 9 or even 2 hours in the summer period. If we can use VPP to lower those peak demand, we can avoid calling the most expensive, a power plant to support that load.
Yeah, I think it's hard to understate the importance of that time horizon. I think I know this has been a moving target, so somebody fact check me if I'm wrong here. But I think that the California load forecast was expecting about 6 gigawatt increase over the next 5 years, kind of by 2030. 5 to 6 gigawatts in 5 years. There are very few resources that are going to be able to be kind of built out and deployed kind of within that time horizon to meet this just kind of tidal wave of kind of additional kind of load coming from data centers and AI and kind of all the things that we've been talking about. The time horizon really kind of puts into kind of sharp relief the tools that we have available today to deploy, and I think VPPs are one of the few solutions.
I want to do another audience lightning round. How many are enrolled in VPPs that you know of? Not so many, not sure. Yeah, it's hard to know sometimes, right? How many wish they were? Okay, let's talk. Everybody can help you here. Yeah, everybody, why not? Okay, well, let's do, I'm going to pick up the pace a tiny bit because we want to cover some success story stuff and then talk about the challenges and then get into our policy spotlight for sure and then allow some time for questions. But let's kind of maybe on a kind of semi-lightning basis talk about your favorite VPPs or, AKA case study success stories. What's gone on in Puerto Rico, for example, might be fun to highlight, but just where you've seen something that really has been a meaningful impact.
I can start here. I think the most impactful VPP we ever operate is in Puerto Rico. Like Puerto Rico have a very different grid. Planning reserve margin is really thin. A lot of the time utility forecast there's going to be a generation shortage for next day for a few hours. And without meeting that, without bridging that gap, the island sometimes has to experience rolling blackout, a frequent blackout actually on the island. So when we operate this VPP, I think so far we have about 5,000 batteries enrolled in that program. When the utility forecast a generation shortage for next day, they call us to dispatch to meet 2 hour or 4 hours load. That VPP actually provide meaningful grid services, helping the entire island from rolling blackout risk. So I think that's a huge contribution from these type of resources.
I can go next. One of my favorite examples at the moment is not a VPP that has like a name that you can point to necessarily, but it is a use case for VPPs that I think is really exciting. Is going to be a big part of the future of this industry, which is we're starting to see some of our battery partners using the projected revenues from participating their customers' batteries in VPP programs to give customers discounts on purchasing batteries to reduce some of the upfront costs of buying these devices, which is exactly what larger power plants do, right? They use their estimates of the cash flows from a power plant to defray some of the upfront capital costs of those power plants. As VPPs are getting, people are getting more experience with VPPs, getting a better understanding of what the cash flows are, understanding that these cash flows are, more certain than they perhaps have been in the past. It's possible to do the same thing with VPPs as well, which will help more customers afford these distributed devices that are still quite expensive for a number of customers, especially those at the bottom end of the income spectrum. So LEAP now has a lot of data on what these revenue streams from VPPs look like, and how secure they are, and how bankable they are. And we're very excited to facilitate more opportunities to use VPPs as a way to help our partners defray the upfront costs of these devices for customers as well.
Okay.
Really quickly.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, I think this is going to sound like half glass empty, but I'll end on a glass half full. I think one of the challenges really for VPPs is data access, and I think one of the I don't actually think that smart meter data is the answer. I think for the VPP folks in there, like before you start kind of sharpening your pitchforks and whatnot, I think that smart meter data can be an answer. I don't think it is the only answer. I think that there are other data sources, such as kind of device telemetry, that I think enable a very reliable, precise means to be able to, one, measure and verify the load impact of some of these various devices, and also settle in kind of energy market positions. And so I think to that end, I've seen some really cool programs, particularly kind of DSGS option 4, as being able to kind of prove out that kind of device level telemetry, as well as to an extent, I think PG&E's ART program also is able to bring on board a broader swath of participants, so that we aren't necessarily limited by that data access, and we're able to kind of really kind of unlock that kind of full potential of assets already deployed.
Okay, well, let's talk about the challenges. There are many, I'm sure, but what are sort of the top 2, 3 that come to mind?
Well, I've already talked about the exporting challenges with batteries. I'd like to take a second to maybe also echo what Curtis here said about data access. I think it's hard to understate the difficulties that inequitable access to customer data creates for third-party VPP providers to operate in this market. You just can't participate a VPP in any program without access to customers' data on how they're using their devices. Without that, you can't know how they're performing in a demand response event. You can't measure that performance. You can't, get paid and pass those payments along to their customer. And Curtis made a really good point that, there's opportunities outside of smart meter data to do this, right? Most people in the audience right now probably have a phone in their pocket or their purse that's sending data to the cloud as we speak. Devices today have the ability to transmit data very accurately, very quickly to other sources. Yet, for the most part, VPP programs in California and across the country still require or still only allow smart meter data to be used to participate in the wholesale markets or in VPP programs. DSGS option 4 is a great example, and I'm glad that Curtis pointed it out. We would like to see, and are hopeful that we will see in the future, CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, become more comfortable accepting device-level data to settle demand response performance so that it is easier for customers to transmit their data to the market operator to participate in these programs because right now having the utility smart meter being the only way that customers can share their data and that third-party providers can access their data is a significant bottleneck that is preventing a lot of enrollment that otherwise would be taking place in these programs from occurring.
To talk a little bit about California, I think that at a high level, there's been so much activity around virtual power plants in California, and that leaves us now with a little bit of a patchwork. We have programs that are funded in the budget, and political winds blow this way and that way, and those budgets are put at risk. That's been a problem in this state. And we also have, some success with our market with CAISO, but DERs are not able to be rewarded for resource adequacy the way we think they should be in the market today. So those are some of the problems that we're looking to tackle at United with some of the legislation we're working on this session.
Yeah, definitely echo on the CAISO challenge. I think wholesale market participation is critical because it allows CAISO to have more visibility into DER operation. It's allow better system planning, but existing tariff or market framework prevent this resource effectively from effectively participating in the market. And let me just give you a very specific example to help you understand what are some of the challenges. So a few years ago, we actually partnered with LEAP to offer our battery into the wholesale market to provide RA to the CCAs or utilities. And let's assume Susan is a Sunrun solar and battery customers, but also she has a Google Nest thermostat offered by OhmConnect in the past. And OhmConnect would put this thermostat into the CAISO market as a rush reward program. Perfect. And then, because Susan also have a battery, the battery is also eligible to participate in the CAISO market to provide RA. So when I try to enroll Susan through LEAP into the CAISO market, then that triggers some dual participation error. So basically, LEAP would told me, please call Susan, and Susan can call OhmConnect to unenroll the thermostat from the OhmConnect program before enroll batteries into the CAISO market through Sunrun. As you can see, we are talking about two different assets, both eligible to provide some level of resource adequacy benefit, but because of this existing challenge in the CAISO market, I cannot. So this is only one of many issues we have in the CAISO market. I want to call out there is a CAISO working group and trying to tackle this issue, actually thanks to Renew Home and LEAP's effort to tee this up. But also we need to be conscious or be I don't know. It's gonna take multiple years to make any meaningful changes in the tariff. So I'm thinking about, if we have working group now, any meaningful changes will happen until, let's say, Q1 2027. What can we do between now and then? So there's a lot from the policy side to enable DER to participate in the wholesale market effectively.
Yeah, I think the kind of multi-device tenancy issue is a perfect kind of tee up for, at least from my perspective, what one of the biggest kind of impediments are to VPPs today. I think that is a lot of kind of policy and tariff and a kind of ISO hurdles, high hurdles to jump over. But I think really kind of clunky user experience and really kind of friction-filled funnels is some of the probably the biggest challenge in order to kind of achieve this magnitude of VPPs that I think everyone in this room kind of hopes that it's able to. And I think one of the things that at Renew, kind of what we've really been focused on is how to build that seamless user experience such that the superpowers of these devices are kind of unlocked as soon as the device is kind of like taken out of the box and installed on the wall. I think at the Nest thermostat, as an example, the initial kind of superpower for that device was being able to save homeowners energy, being able to save them money by adapting to their schedule. And with Renew, we're able to kind of amplify kind of some of those superpowers by also making it intuitive to the customer why they would connect their utility account. So we can pull down their rate code, pull down their rate plan. So not only is this thermostat just saving energy and saving money, but now it's also responding to kind of time of use tariffs. And having this thermostat where we understand kind of how the home kind of breathes, kind of how it's gains heat, how it loses heat, understanding kind of the rhythms and kind of the patterns of energy use kind of within the home, now being able to respond to changing day-ahead prices, real-time prices, kind of local constraints at the feeder level. That really kind of enables this very kind of like personalized experience that you're able to tell, and you're able to kind of build out this kind of personalization for every customer's use, so that we know that the kind of the comfort tolerances are about to kind of get hit. Let's dial it back a little bit. Dial it back so that the homeowners, the tenants, they stay comfortable, so that they continue to participate in the next event, in the next season, and in that next program. And I think it's really that user experience. And just like one last example that I think, kind of looking outside of this industry, that I think would be really helpful to try to emulate, are smart speakers, right? It is really intuitive when you buy a smart speaker. I'm going to connect this to my Spotify account. I'm going to connect this to my Apple Music or whatever kind of service you use. That is intuitive to the customer, and it is accomplished within seconds. Yeah. And if we want VPPs to kind of achieve that magnitude of just kind of scope and scale, I think that's kind of the ethos that we need to be rowing towards.
I mean, for me, it's having spent some time in my career at Apple and enjoying the keynotes that Steve Jobs would used to give, where he'd pull out the newest thing and say, it just works. You're always like, thank God, And only lately did I find that there's this clean energy thing going on in our phones where it won't charge unless there's cleaner energy. And that actually hit me one time where it didn't charge. I was like, why didn't my phone charge? Because I was in a place where clean energy wasn't that available. You can override it, but it totally happening in the background with great impact across the millions of phones. So I love that intuitive background, just take care of it. Yeah. So that kind of tees us up really nicely, Chloe, for your insights on policy especially. We wanted to kind of highlight AB 740 and just understand what is that one about, and how can it help advance the VPP momentum. There's also AB 44, SB 620. These are California legislation in motion. But to the extent you can fill us in on all that and how we can support.
Yeah, I'll go over the bills quickly and want to encourage anyone who wants to talk about them to connect with me after. We have a state policy lead who's laser focused on VPPs in California, Edson Perez, and he is two of these bills are being heard in committee today, so he's in Sacramento working on those. But I would encourage, if you're at a startup or an organization that is interested in VPPs, doesn't really know where to start, throwing some weight behind these bills is a great step to take, and I can definitely help facilitate that. So United right now is really excited about AB 740. That's a bill that would require the California Energy Commission to work with the CPUC and CAISO on a deployment plan statewide for virtual power plants. A plan, we're not saying what that plan should look like, but there is a need because although there's already a lot of success so far in California with VPPs, as we've talked about, there's still far to go. So that is a plan that would help set some timelines, help bring folks together to talk about the barriers like we're doing on stage, but in an organized format, and ideally help bring VPPs to the point where they're contributing to reliability and affordability to the degree that they are able. So that's AB 740, again, being heard in committee as we speak. AB 44 is a specific one related to resource adequacy. So right now we have utilities or load-serving entities, LSEs in California, have to put forward a demand forecast. And that corresponds to the resource adequacy procurement that they have to then pay for and procure. And this is kind of a ratepayer justice issue in our minds, because what happens when the LSCs have to procure a certain amount of resource adequacy is the ratepayer pays for that. So that process currently doesn't really take demand flexibility into account the way that it needs to. LSC might be procuring resource adequacy, and then it's also running these demand flexibility programs. And so essentially there is sort of like a duplicate efforts going on where there's demand flexibility that's not being taken into account in the demand forecast. And so we have, too much power or too much resources there, and ratepayers are paying for both. So we want to see that process updated. That's AB 44. SB 541, that's broader than VPPs, but essentially that bill takes the load flex goal that California already has and requires utilities to report on a utility or on an LSE basis on their progress toward that goal. And each of these folks are involved in these bills too, so I'd love to give you folks a chance to speak on those policies or other policy priorities that you guys see in California this session. We're also looking toward next session too.
I'm actually going to usurp that and go to Q&A. But we'll see if anybody asks about that. I'm happy to, but I want to make sure we get a couple chances. Thanks for that overview. Are there questions that we can take? And if not, we can have you guys weigh in on the policy pros and cons. I see one back there, and there's a mic coming to you, and then I see you next. Yep.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Thanks for the really insightful panel. I'm curious your take on how we can better activate renters for the VPP markets in general. It's definitely a privilege to own a home in America, and I think it's something like 65% of people don't, and that's a hugely undertapped resource when it comes to this. So curious all of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so just how do we activate renters in the VPP market? It's hard if you don't own the devices, for example, or have a place to charge for that matter. Your car.
I can start. I know that there are tools that will allow renters and companies that are using these tools that will allow renters to kind of take advantage of the value of distributed energy resources without necessarily having to install one in their own home. So there's something in California called virtual net energy metering, where there are many companies servicing multifamily housing who will install a battery, maybe a solar and battery array on the premises, in my understanding, that will serve the entire apartment building, help them reduce rates by operating that battery during peak times, perhaps to avoid time of use rates when they're most expensive. There is increasingly a focus on creating programs or designing programs to take advantage of that virtual net metering option as well. The demand side grid support program that we've mentioned, I think Curtis mentioned option 4, which is for smart thermostats. There's also an option 3, which is specifically focused on batteries. That's the one that allows and compensates exports that I mentioned earlier. That option actually just opened up to virtual net energy metered facilities as well. So that's something that's very exciting. And we hope to see that type of design adopted in the wholesale market, VPP participation pathways, as well as other VPP options that exist in California. Because these facilities, these homes often get left behind. They're sort of an afterthought a lot of the times. People only ever think about people who can like put an EV in their garage and like install a Powerwall next to it. And like, I rent myself and I'd love to install a smart thermostat, but it's just not really in the cards right now. So I think it's going to be a mixture of technology innovation as well as innovation around regulatory and program design innovation to make sure that these homes are able to participate in the same way.
I think in front there, question, and then in the back, right in the back, behind.
Thank you. Hello. We've heard a lot of discussion about DSGS option 3, and I've had the privilege of being able to look into DSGS option 3 through my work a little bit more because we also do things with demand response. And one thing that we've seen in the recent guidelines that previously, like you mentioned, this has been a way for batteries to export a lot more, get compensated for the export, but there's been changes to guidelines to make sort of that compensation a little more difficult. I think they're adding in a baseline calculation, owing to concerns over things like double compensation, things that California is very acutely cognizant of and trying to avoid. And I just want to get a sense for what do you think about sort of those, how that may end up challenging the, for example, adoption of VPPs, of batteries more expansively, and in general, what the sort of sense is for managing things like this dual compensation type of situation. Should it be something that we are worried about when it comes to engaging and enabling these assets?
Yeah, I definitely think baseline is a huge issue over here because even from policy perspective, even if you allow battery exports to be eligible to earn VPP compensation, implementing a baseline definitely going to derate the performance overall. I think this is very unique to residential VPP, particularly if the customer is having a thermostat or battery, because if you think about utility scale generation or even industrial scale, everything is incremental to the grid because without grid services or VPP event, the batteries are just sitting idle to do nothing. So that means everything, all the discharge from the battery inverter is incremental to the grid. That's not true in the residential market because for residential customer, when you adopt batteries, your primary use case besides backup reserve is to do bill management. And you want to incentivize customer to use that battery frequently to manage their bill. But at the same time, if you put that batteries into a VPP, from a grid service off-taker perspective, I get it. They care about what's incremental are you providing to the system. But in that case, there's actually a misalignment on incentive. Are you trying to maximize customer bill savings, or are you trying to maximize grid services benefit? Or in the perfect scenarios, if you can align on the incentives, can you maximize both at the same time? So definitely, just to answer your question, DSGS option 3 in general, I think we're gonna see some of the challenge through the rest of the year or 2026. How do we provide analysis or narrative to showcase, baseline is not a huge problem for this type of fleet?
Just to comment on double counting in general and incrementality, I think one paradigm we need to get away from is this idea that demand response performance is a deviation from what a device has done in the past. Like that used to be how we measured demand response. That is still how we measure demand response. We say this device used X load on an event day. In the past month, it used Y load, so the difference, the response is Y minus X. I think we want to tweak that thinking slightly to say that a demand response performance is the deviation from what the device would have been doing in the absence of a demand response event, which sounds very similar, but is actually very different when you think about something like a distributed battery, which can dispatch every single day in a customer's home and not affect their customer experience at all. If you are dispatching this battery every single day to participate in the market, you're not going to have non-event days in the past that you can look to say what this battery would have been doing otherwise. Similar with EVs, similar with a lot of smart thermostats. Customers who are willing to adjust the thermostat frequently to take advantage of VPP payments, might not have a number of days where they didn't adjust their thermostat to point to and say, this is what our load would have been in the absence of demand response event. So you need to start looking for other ways to determine what a customer's counterfactual load would have been. One really robust way to do that is to look at what other similar customers were doing on that same day. Sort of like a comparison group baseline is what this is often referred to. A great way to measure the demand response customer's performance in an event. A very challenging thing to do because most VPP providers, particularly third-party providers, don't have access to tons of customer data, non-participant data to compare their VPPs against. So another option, and this is actually something that DSGS is sort of piloting with their baselines, is instead of looking at like a control group, look at a state average. Look at what the average smart thermostat customer, the average battery customer does on a similar day with similar temperatures under similar conditions as the day that the demand response event took place on. If you do that, if you look at the past 3-4 years of data around what the counterfactual load would have been based on similar customers with similar devices on similar days, you should be able to come up with also a very robust and accurate measurement of what that demand response's performance was on the event day without having to restrict that customer's dispatch the days before to make sure that you can point to their past load to say what they would have been doing otherwise.
That's awesome. There's one more question. I know we're coming up on our time, but let's hear what this last one is.
Hi, hello there. Thanks for taking my question, Thomas Lee from Darapi. One comment and then my question to the person who was asking about renters. There is now a UL standard, 3141, that allows for plug-in solar and batteries, which have until now not been code compliant in the US. So I think that's a big step that will help with that. My question is on sort of how do we move VPPs from a utility customer operations conversation, which is where it has historically been, into the control room, right? Where then the person who's looking at the big screen of what's going on the grid can say, I'm going to push this button and I'm going to dispatch a VPP. I'm curious, for panelists, are you having any discussions with your utility partners in terms of how you might make that transition?
Curtis, you and I were talking about that a little, so if you want to have
happy to.
word.
Yeah, I think this ultimately kind of gets to all the different value streams that kind of VPPs are able to unlock. And if you had to kind of quickly kind of enumerate those, I would say there's the kind of resource adequacy and capacity value, which I think largely the industry has been pretty effective at kind of tapping. I think two, there's the kind of wholesale day ahead kind of real-time electricity kind of positions, which I think there's some good forward progress there. There's ancillary services and whatnot. And then lastly, I think the distribution level value. I think that's ultimately the kind of what the question is getting at, in my view, is kind of it is one of the things that VPPs and just distributed energy resources are very uniquely positioned to be able to deliver against. And I think you're right to kind of highlight that until the kind of the controllability, the dispatchability, and particularly the visibility of the assets that are deployed, at the substation level. I think also there is a kind of locational element that needs to be solved, where we know very precisely this device is on this feeder. This device is kind of within a very kind of specific location, kind of within the utilities kind of topography, or the kind of distribution grid topography. So I think, one, we need a kind of more standardized way to be able to kind of link device to location, and then have really effective means to forecast kind of what this particular device at this feeder level, what the aggregation devices at that feeder level would be able to deliver at any given kind of point of time during the day. Because I think once you get to kind of that level of dispatch, you don't want to risk, tripping some of the hosting capacity of local circuits. So I think really that kind of like high resolution kind of forecasting and the locational aspect is crucial to be able to unlock that value stream.
I think we'll wrap there. I wanted to give Chloe a chance to talk about Counterspark for just a second, the grassroots or part of advanced energy, if you could.
Yeah, for sure. We have an arm of Advanced Energy United called Counterspark. We use that arm of our organization to essentially mobilize regular people, DER owners, sometimes companies that aren't, active in lobbying or advocacy, to take action on policy. So if you go to United's website, you look to Counterspark, we have a number of action items around the existing California bills that I mentioned, AB 720, SB 541, and AB 44. So if you check out Advanced Energy United, you can see some action items on our website under the Counterspark part of the site.
Thank you. So that's your call to action. You can get involved even as a regular person. It's awesome. Please join me in thanking this really knowledgeable, insightful, and dedicated panel on VPPs. Thank you.